The Thunder Bay Police Service is under fire for its handling of sudden death cases involving Indigenous peoples. The situation has been called a crisis by many, but the police don't see it that way.
Kenora, Ontario. This is cottage country for many Winnipeggers. A year ago, a young First Nations girl disappeared here. Her story is sadly similar to hundreds of others across the country, but the story of how this community reacted is different. Delaine Copenace was a 16-year-old Anishinaabe girl, a shy teen. She loved animals, all kinds of music, and video games.
Such a wonderful kid. She was very loving, very silly all the time. She loved art. She was a very good artist. This one's her version of the Joker and Harlequin. If you know where my daughter is, please do the right thing and let her come home to her family.
The search went on for nearly a month. More than 100 volunteers combed the woods while Ontario Provincial Police flew above. It ended when her body was found weeks later in Lake of the Woods. A year later, her family is still struggling with its grief. Daryl Redsky led the teams looking for Delaine, a task he's performed many times before. This is not a new story in this part of the world.
I see a lot of anguish. I see a lot of hurt. I see a lot of pain in the mothers, in the aunties, in the grandmothers that come and ask for our help.
On March 22nd, the search for Delaine ended in a way that surprised Redsky and shocked her family. After nearly a month of searching, Delaine's body was found here off the dock. It's just meters from the provincial police station in downtown Kenora. Delaine's death opened old wounds in a place where the natural beauty hides an ugly history. From the early 1900s, there were 3 residential schools in the area. Many children tried to run away. Some died. Few locals seemed to notice the tragedy unfolding in their town.
"41-year-old Stacey DeBungy was found dead in the McIntyre River in the fall of 2015. Police decided quickly he fell into the river, drunk. An independent review has now backed up the findings of a 2016 private investigation and a Fifth Estate documentary, saying there was no basis to affirmatively rule out foul play, and that investigators' premature conclusion may have been drawn because the deceased was Indigenous.
Just the way that they said that he found him.
Brad DeBungy never believed what police told him, that his brother Stacey drowned here on Thunder Bay's McIntyre River after passing out on the riverbank. Even after his band's counsel hired an investigator and found evidence to the contrary, he couldn't get police to listen.
I was up against a brick wall and they wouldn't answer my questions and this and that. And just how they came to the assumption that he rolled into the water and drowned.
Concerns now confirmed by Ontario's independent police review director, who says police not only jumped to conclusions, they were negligent, overlooking evidence, and possibly discriminatory because of Debungy's Indigenous status. No surprise to Indigenous leaders here.
Somebody made the assumption that it's just another drunk Indian rolling in the river.
It seemed like everybody just being put aside, like, oh, their lives don't matter or whatnot, because they're Indians and Native people and this and that. So.
I got prejudice and racism from people, even with my fair skin, makes it like sad to believe that it was 1,000 times worse for other kids. So people knew that I was Indigenous because my family is very Indigenous. I'm just happen to be very, very pale compared to them, which is fine. But people knew about it, and I always felt very ashamed of it, and they would make jokes about me wanting to dance at the school powwows, and I had kids shooting bow and arrows at me in high school. Wow. And it was just the fact that they would say things like, "Oh, but you're one of the good ones," or "You're pretty Native," or "It's okay, you're not like them." And so it felt as if I was included but excluded. Mm-hmm. And then it was just a weird cycle of going through that in high school. Like I said, there's kids who are going through this worse than me, and that's what makes me so heartbroken.
racism or, what it was about or, how much it hurt. Just because I didn't experience any of that prior to moving to Thunder Bay. I don't think it's safe, especially if you're, young, young Aboriginal by yourself.
Racism at Thunder Bay is definitely not isolated. I'd say at least once a day, one of my friends or peers will go through a racial event.
I outlined in my report for analyzing racial discrimination, I found that in my review of cases, Thunder Bay Police Service investigators, they failed on an unacceptably high number of occasions to treat or protect the deceased and his or her family equally and without discrimination because the deceased was Indigenous. Investigators too readily presumed accident in cases of Indigenous sudden deaths. They relied upon evidence of drowning or hypothermia as if it virtually determined that the death was accidental. They placed extraordinary weight on the deceased's level of intoxication as if it virtually determined that the death was accidental. They failed to take even the most basic investigative steps in a number of sudden death cases. They ignored evidence potentially pointing to a non-accidental cause or contribution to the death. Some attempted to explain the deficiencies in the investigations by reflecting and referencing their workload as well as a lack of training and resources. In my view, these explanations cannot fully account for the failings that my team and I observed, given their nature and severity. The failure to conduct adequate investigations and the premature conclusions drawn in these cases, at least in part, attributed to racial stereotyping. Racial stereotyping involves transforming individual experiences into generalized assumptions about an identifying group defined by race. We observed this process of generalization based on race in a number of the investigations we reviewed. Officers repeatedly relied on generalized notions about how Indigenous people likely came to their deaths and acted or refrained from acting based on those biases. This does not represent a determination that all Thunder Bay Police Service officers engaged in intentional racism, no. However, the fact remains that investigations were too often handled differently because the deceased was Indigenous. As I indicated earlier, I also examined the issue of racism more broadly. That is, beyond how sudden death investigations were conducted. In this regard, we conducted 36 interviews with Thunder Bay Service members in the course of our review. We encountered a wide range of beliefs and attitudes. Some expressed very disturbing views. While these views were expressed by a minority of officers, they were expressed by more than just a bad few apples. We also heard from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous community members who described troubling attitudes, statements, and actions by officers. Overall, I found that systemic racism exists in Thunder Bay Police Service at an institutional level.
purpose do the stereotypes serve? Because with colonial processes, in order for colonization to happen, dehumanization of Indigenous people need to happen. And so stereotypes, in my opinion, perpetuate that dehumanization.
Ask yourself, what exactly do I know about this person? Why am I thinking this stereotype? Where did I learn that? What makes me think that about that person?
Police in Thunder Bay, Ontario are investigating a video that appears to show a police officer striking a teenager who is strapped to a stretcher. It's not clear what led up to the incident or why the person is strapped down. The teenager has been identified as a 17-year-old from a First Nations community north of Thunder Bay. First Nations leaders are calling for an independent investigation.
I don't know why she decided to start being combative here. You're just going to the hospital. You're going to the hospital.
What?
That's a...
So we got that on camera.
You spit on me! You do not spit on me!
Now, the Nishnawbe Aski Nation, which represents 49 First Nations in Northern Ontario, has said that they would like this to be investigated, and also has identified that the 17-year-old was attending school at the Mattawa Learning Centre, which is why they may have been in the city in Thunder Bay. And so it is something that is being looked into. CBC has made calls to the Child Youth Advocate, as well as to police and to the other independent investigators out there, that we are outraged by the actions of the officer depicted in this video. We do not know all of the details that led to the incident, but there is simply no justification for such violent and callous treatment of a youth in such a defenseless position. Going on to say that such actions by police, whatever the cause, must be fully investigated by an independent authority, and results made public by the Chief of Police.
A disturbing video that appears to show an officer assaulting a First Nations man in Slate Falls could lead to some serious repercussions.
This cell phone video shows the NAPS officer standing over Slate Falls First Nation resident James Massakiash after it appears he was punched in the back of the head and thrown to the ground.
Anishinaabe, Shkegawak, and all Indigenous peoples have the right to feel safe and be treated equitably within the city of Thunder Bay, especially by those sworn to serve and protect.
What I was seeing and still continue to see is that in our capacity, we are failing miserably because, again, we have, some serious issues.
Systemic racism exists within the Thunder Bay Police Service and needs to be ripped out at its roots.
If this is your family, you would want justice.
So you said this is not a crisis for you. What would be a crisis?
So we recognize we certainly are in challenging times. That's different than being in crisis.
Crisis, I don't know, you have multiple investigations, you're chief on your investigation, you're charged with the crime.
Right? We have families who have to go home, not receiving justice.
Their families deserve answers.
You have multiple kids dying in the river. You don't know how some of them died, it's undetermined.
We demand that the Solicitor General of Ontario proceed with dismantling the Thunder Bay Police Service.
I think anywhere else in the world, that's a crisis.
For us currently, though, what we see is business as usual.
get that feeling like it happened like yesterday or something. Well, being here, that's just how I feel right now. I was coming back from the theater that night. When we were in high school, we were given curfews to be home at 10 o'clock. After a while, like I felt I was getting kind of a little nervous about them, and so I told them, well, you know what, you guys, I gotta get going now. All of a sudden, this guy went into my right, and then the guy went into the center. Like they started blocking off the walkway here. Just one guy on my left, he kind of walked down into underneath the bridge here, and he had like a 2x4 lumber like this. And so as I turned to my right, and then that's when he took a swing with that 2x4 right on my back.
And did you go down?
Yeah, of course I went down. Two guys grabbed me from here, then the guy, of course, grabbed me from the front. And they had like a strong grip on me. Like I did try pulling away, I tried getting off, I tried doing anything, but then there was three guys in one, right? And then that's when they pushed me into the side here, and I ended up falling on the water here. It was really cold, like in the end of October. They were saying, fucking block them out, block them out. Like I thought it was it for me, like that's what I thought. I was feeling helpless at the time. I was scared, I started thinking about my grandma because she was mostly the one that raised me when I was a kid. And sorry. I started thinking about people that were close to me. Like I thought this was it.
death, an inquest was underway into the deaths of 7 young Indigenous people, 5 of whom had been found in Thunder Bay waterways under similar circumstances. Police were also accused of rushing to the assumption that those deaths were accidents. This latest review calls that troubling, saying one would have reasonably expected that investigators would be particularly vigilant in ensuring that the sudden death of an Indigenous man found in the river was thorough. Unfortunately, the opposite was true here.
Gilbo says he was going to Thunder Bay's Marina Park to show support for the family of a young lady whose body was discovered in the park on Friday. Police have only said it is an ongoing sudden death investigation into a deceased adult female. When Gilbo arrived, he saw a wedding party taking pictures in front of the crime scene. His post on Facebook has been shared nearly 1,000 times. His post ends, "Now I got you all on pictures and video, laughing at a Native girl's crime scene." Thunder Bay Police spokesperson Chris Adams released a statement on Monday saying, quote, "There was no intent to cause any indignity or disrespect to anyone based on where the officer was located. Public interactions with our officers who are parked or situated in settings which have a high number of pedestrians, such as a park, are quite common." The statement says, "We understand that the bride had a connection to a retired police officer and that the acting police chief of the embattled police service reminded officers that, quote, while public interactions are encouraged, there may be times where these contacts can be viewed as insensitive." The incident comes as the Thunder Bay Police Services Board independent expert panel is holding community consultations in the city. The panel will speak with the media on Thursday.
"17-year-old Braden Jacob came to Thunder Bay for grief counseling, and now he's dead. And he joins 14-year-old Josiah Beggs and 17-year-old Tammy Keyash and 15-year-old Jordan Wabass and so many other Indigenous youth who died violently in Thunder Bay. And they were victimized after being forced to leave their communities because the government refuses to build proper schools or provide services. So to the Minister for Public Safety, will he commit an RCMP team to work with Indigenous leaders to find out why so many young Indigenous youth are dying in Thunder Bay? No more fallen feathers.